Welcome to your Canadiens Connection on Rocket Sports Radio. We are proud to be the trusted source for all things Habs for more than a decade. This is the Canadiens Connection podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio, keeping you informed, engaged, and entertained. My name is Michael Spinella, and I'll be your host for the next hour. This is episode 266 of the Canadiens Connection podcast, and I'm very pleased to be joined in the studio by my co-host, the editor of the Hockey News Montreal, the founder and the president of Rocket Sports, Rick Stevens. How are you doing today, Rick?
I'm doing great, thanks. My goodness, what a busy week it's been since we last talked to our wonderful listeners. I had to look twice because it says that the Canadiens have only played 3 games this season, but with all the news there is, with everything that's happened, we seem to be much further along than that.
Yeah, I agree. We're going to have a lot of news to get to on this first segment. Of course, a couple of games happened since we last were here. We're going to talk some prospects as well. The Laval Rocket have played a few more than 2 games so far. They've had a pretty busy season as of yet. And then just some general news from around the NHL. In segment 2, we're going to welcome Dr. Stephen Morris to the show, our brand new Rocket Sports medical consultant, as we take a look inside the injury with Doc Morris, examining Doc's road to recovery and the Canadiens' ability to rally. And in segment 3, of course, it's the Have Your Say segment. Our Canadiens Connection question of the week is, in the absence of Kirby Dach, who do you think will step up to the plate and fill his role? Rick, if our listeners wanted to tune in, let us know their thoughts. What's the best way for them to do so?
My expectation is that they had a lot to say last week, but I expect they're going to have a lot more to say this week. This is episode 266 of the Canadiens Connection, and as we said, there's a ton for them to respond to, so they can text us at 5853-ROCKET, 5853-ROCKET, or send us an email, hello@rocketsportsmedia.com, hello@rocketsportsmedia.com.
You can also reach out to us on our social medias, just making sure you're following at Habs Connection on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Also, check out our website at canadiensconnection.fm. You can find every single episode of this podcast here. Like you said, 266 episodes, so quite a bit of content to get to.
Mm-hmm.
Also, just a reminder here, check out our comprehensive game previews and post-game recaps for every Canadiens game at thn.com/Montreal. And here's what's happened since we've been gone. We've had a couple of games, like we said, if we want to go all the way back to last Saturday, October the 14th, it was the home opener. Chicago comes to visit Montreal, the debut of Bedard at Bell Center, and Bedard is getting booed. Not sure how to feel about that one. I guess Habs fans disappointed that he's not in Montreal, although I will say not his fault, so I'm not sure why there was some booing going on. Habs dominated the faceoff circle, winning 75%. They scored 3 goals in the second period. Pearson, Caulfield, and Monahan all found the back of the net. The Hawks cut that down to a 1-goal lead. 2 goals from Tyler Johnson in the third, but they came up just short. And Rick, very disappointing home opening ceremony in this one. I feel like a lot of our listeners were quite disappointed, and let us know about that.
I think it's been well known and repeated often that the Montreal Canadiens have one of the best ceremonies in sports. I'll go beyond the NHL, in sports. In fact, you always hear there are two organizations on earth that know how to do ceremony. That's the Montreal Canadiens and the House of Windsor, Buckingham Palace. But not this year. My goodness, that was I've seen a lot of opening ceremonies. That was the worst Montreal Canadiens ceremony by a wide margin, and may have been one of the worst I've seen considering outside of the Canadiens, NHL overall. It was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. You had groups of players coming out. And then they'd all kind of step forward and they'd all shuffle around the circle. It was all, choreographed, and it was silly. It was absolutely silly. It wasn't the Montreal Canadiens. And that collective, we heard afterwards that, the Canadiens don't have any one star, so they wanted to come out as a group. That's honestly just silly. No torch. There was no torch. What is the torch? Why is the torch so important to the Montreal Canadiens? And Kent Hughes and Marty said afterwards that they wanted they had a memo from the league. It was about timing. They wanted to break from the past. This is a new Montreal Canadiens. Well, what are the Montreal Canadiens without their past? Without their, everybody calls it their storied history. There's nothing. Haven't done anything in 30 years. So you have to rely on the past. And the past, that torch, is significant because it represents what's on. It rings the Canadiens' dressing room. The poem, and you all know it. To you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold high. In Flanders Fields is the name of the poem. 1915, John McCrae. He was more than a poet. He was a medical officer in the First World War. He had a remarkable medical career, that included stops at Montreal General and the Royal Victoria Hospital in Montreal. And the Canadiens have adopted a phrase of that poem, and it's meaningful. And it's that torch is being passed from generations. And if you look at that poem and include a little bit more than the familiar, what rings the dressing room, it says, "Take up our quarrel with the foe." That's talking about past generations of soldiers in the poem, and the Canadiens have adopted it as past generations of players. To you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. Continues, if ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep. So was it breaking faith by not including the torch? Of course it was. This was a horrendous opening ceremony. You may think I'm making too much of it, but this is the Montreal Canadiens. This is the Montreal Canadiens. They didn't introduce Carey Price. He's on the roster. No introduction of Carey Price until later during the game. He was shown in the press box. This was, and then goes on to the American anthem, and the anthemist misses half the words, mispronounces half the words. That was an embarrassment. I'm not surprised that of all the comments we received, of all the texts we received, of all the emails we received, most of our listeners commented on how horrible the opening ceremonies were, and the Connor Bedard thing you mentioned. That was just a lack of class. That was juvenile that he was booed every time. And don't tell me that it was the ultimate sign of respect, because that's silly. That's a silly argument. So off to a bad start there, I think, despite the Canadiens getting the win.
Absolutely. And a few more things that went on in this game. The Kirby Dach injury. He left early after taking a hit from Jared Tenorti. That's going to be a reoccurring topic, and it's going to relate to our big topic segment. So we won't get into it too much, but any further takeaways from this home opener?
I think no, and listen, it's not just me. It's not, I feel an obligation to represent our listeners and the comments that we received, and some of them were really upset about the Canadiens opening night game, opening home opener ceremony.
Absolutely. Tons of fans who have been with the team for a long time. And yeah, if you go onto Twitter, if you go anywhere, I think the consensus was this was a huge miss by the Montreal Canadiens. And hopefully this is a mistake they don't make again. We'll have to wait and see on that. But disappointing all around when they just essentially broke the tradition there. And like you said, this team has a lot of history. you take that away, there's really not much there. I know there's a lot of newer fans, but those newer fans probably took on their fandom from their parents who remember all those days with the Montreal Canadiens winning tons and tons of Stanley Cups. So I think we both agree, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners do agree as well, that that opening ceremony, huge miss by the Montreal Canadiens organization. Moving along to the next game on October the 17th, Montreal falls 5-2 to the Minnesota Wild. Just a bad effort all around. To me, what stood out the most is the Habs power play somehow got worse in this game. They gave up 2 goals against on their power play. So 2 shorthanded goals by the Minnesota Wild, while the Montreal Canadiens just could not get anything together on the power play. Montembeault looked a little bit slow. I think the goal that stood out to me the most was one that the puck bounced off of Montembeault's shoulder. It goes straight up in the air. You see him look straight up, and then the puck falls behind him and into the net, and he didn't really react at all. So not a good look there, and the Minnesota Wild go 3 for 8 on the power play. All the goals coming on special teams, either shorthanded or with the man advantage. So not a great start to this season for the Montreal Canadiens.
I know Marty said that special teams weren't important last season, or in particular the power play wasn't important last year. It better start being important this year, and a good start to improving the power play would be to fire Alex Burrows today. Is it his fault? Yes. Not all his fault, but a good portion. And he's had plenty of time to prove himself. That 2 shorthanded goals on the same power play by Minnesota, that just speaks to a level of confusion of the players on the ice, and that's a coaching problem. The other part of this game was a little bit cringy, was the fact that the Bell Center serenaded the win of Marc-Andre Fleury. I understand likely his last appearance at the Bell Center. I understand a polite round of applause, but they were chanting his name at the end of the game. And compare that to booing Connor Bedard in the first game. A little bit odd.
Absolutely. So the Canadiens' record 1-1-1, so they have one of everything. 24th in the NHL, 1 point back of the Toronto Maple Leafs. So make sure you check out Habs Notepad, Habs headlines and feature articles, and game day posts appearing regularly at thn.com/Montreal. Taking a look at roster news, as we said a few times here, Kirby Dach will miss the remainder of the season with a knee injury. He left that game against Chicago, and we'll take a deep dive into that in segment 2 with Dr. Morris.
And I think the only thing I'll add here, because as you said, Doc Morris is up in the second segment, is just we're going to watch for the ripple effect. The Doc has a major impact on his line mates, on his teammates. When he's in the lineup, what kind of impact is he going to have being out of the lineup?
Another player was injured this past week. Caden Gooley is day-to-day with an upper body injury. He left Tuesday's game and did not return. Lots of mixed messages coming out before the official report here, but nice to see that Caden Gooley's day-to-day. We'll see how long it takes him to come back.
It's crazy. All of the and one of the reasons that we brought on a medical consultant this season is to have a bit of have information that you can be confident in. Rumors were rampant on Twitter this week about Caden Gooley, talking about, he's going to be out 6 to 8 weeks with a broken wrist, all of this sort of thing. Even Elliot Friedman said Gooley is going to be out of action, quote, for a little while. I thought it was interesting that Jonathan Kovacevic in the media availability after practice said, we hope to see Caden again in 2 weeks. So officially, as you said, by the Canadiens day to day, it may be a matter of a week or two. What was a bit, I think it was good to see, was Caden Gooley skated prior to practice on Friday, and he was out there for about 20 minutes skating on his own. So that was good to see. Just adding, I had mentioned about Elliot Friedman, and he had referenced Caden Gooley in his 32 thoughts. He also says Curious to see, and he's speaking about Caden Gooley being out, curious to see if this gives Matthias Norlinder, now in Laval, an opportunity. One thing is clear, Montreal feels much better about Norlinder than it did a year ago. Much, much improved preseason performance. And one more thing I'll add, just personally, personal observation, that is that we hear over and over and over again from Marty St. Louis about he often relies on his own career to relate personal experiences to the players, to say he understands. He's been through it. He's been through everything. In the very first speech he gave to the Canadiens dressing room, and many times since, he's emphasized that he's gone through every stage that the players that he's speaking to have gone through. He wasn't drafted. He was sent to the AHL. All of that. One thing that's missing, one thing that Marty can't relate to from personal experience is injuries. Marty was remarkably healthy during his career. And if you go through, the Hockey DB or Elite Prospects, you'll see 82 games, 82 games, 82 games, 80 games. He was remarkably healthy. So will he be able to relate to a Kirby Dach who's now going to be out the entire season? I said one more thing, but I'm going to add one more. Just because Elliot Friedman brought this up in his 32 Thoughts. Doesn't relate to injuries, but it relates to Marty St. Louis. And let me just read this. Elliot Friedman says, an interesting thing in Montreal to start the season. Only Marty St. Louis does the verbal work with Juraj Slafkovsky. Only Marty can speak to Slafkovsky. That way there's Yes, only Marty can speak to Juraj Slafkovsky. None of the other coaches, the development coach, none of the other coaches. So there's no confusion, no mixed messages, one voice. I've never heard of anything like this before in my life.
Yeah, that's a very confusing thing. I wish there was a little more information because this has many different implications that it could mean. And, I was looking at we were talking about the power play. So I think Slafkovsky's on the second wave there. Is Burroughs not talking to him?
No, I guess it has to go through. This is information, and actually I've heard it from a second source as well. It's they want to take special care with Slafkovsky. He's a very important player to their future. Special rules for a special player, I guess.
All right. Well, I'd be curious to hear a lot more about that one, but it seems like that's all the information we have on that. But going back to injuries, so with the injury to Kirby Dach, Yoel Armia gets the call up. He's not going to play tonight on Saturday the 21st, though. It seems that Michael Pezzetta will be back in the lineup, and Yoel Armia was called up, and that's the right recall for sure. Lots of people talking about Joshua Watt. We'll talk about him in a minute. But this was the right move. And then with Caden Gooley out, that means that Justin Barron will play his first game of the season against the Capitals. And we'll see if once the Canadiens go on a road trip, whether they'll add more. If it all sounds a little confusing, if it all sounds a little chaotic, remember what I said last week. I think we just have to embrace the chaos. We're going to see from the ridiculous to the miraculous this season. The Canadiens fans are going to be on a roller coaster. So thanks to Amy Johnson for clipping. She said, you're going to need this, I think, every week going forward. She clipped that from last week's show. So yes, we're, does it seem like chaos? Yes, but we're embracing the chaos this season. A shame that was not included in your bold predictions episode.
Yeah, that's right.
But Habs might have some reinforcements at center on the way. Christian Dvorak is skating with the team. We mentioned this started last week, so it's a good sign it's continuing. I think the original report said that Dvorak would rejoin the team probably in November.
The change this week is that he's wearing, we've always said he was in a non-contact jersey. This week he's in a regular jersey at practice, skating with the team. And so that looks like his return is imminent, except remember, he was placed on LTIR. He can't return early. He must be on IR for either 24 days or 10 games. Therefore, that means he's probably ready. Physically. But the way they structured the salary cap to start the season, he's likely going to return, as you said, in November.
So last season, it was the Vegas Golden Knights that had the most Canadians and Quebecers on their team. And Rick, I believe there was a bit of a change to this, at least to start the season.
There is. The Montreal Canadiens now can hold the title of Canada's team. They have 18 Canadian-born players on the roster, on the opening night roster. Carey Price is on LTIR. He would make it 19. You have the U.S. as the second most popular nationality on the Canadiens, and they only have 3 players. That would be Jordan Harris, Jesse Ylönen, and Cole Caulfield. Now there's Dvorak and Weidman there as well. What's interesting is the lack of Europeans on the team, and Juraj Slafkovský is the only European, Slovakian forward. We always hear some moaning about the lack of Quebec-born players on the Canadiens. Again, they have the most in the NHL. There are only about enough Quebec-born players in the league for 1 per team. The Canadiens have 4 times that amount. They have 4 Quebec-born players on the NHL roster. They have 11 in the AHL. That gives them 15 in the organization. That's double the number of the next highest. And that team is the New York Islanders, and then Pittsburgh, and then Washington. 1 NHL player, 5 AHL players for 6. So we can put that argument to bed, can't we? At least for this season, please.
Well, Vegas Golden Knights, obviously last year they held those titles. They won the cup. So is this year Montreal's turn?
Yeah,
maybe
that's
not.
it.
But yeah. Anyways.
That would be chaotic for sure.
Absolutely. But anyways, I know like a lot of people do look into this. Personally, I'm not... I don't really keep track of this unless it's the Olympics, of course. But like you said, there you go. The argument's to rest. It's happened.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think let's get to our Habs prospect report.
It's time for the Rocket Report. The Rocket Sports Media Team is your premier source for information about the Laval Rocket, the AHL affiliate of the Montreal Canadiens, as well as Habs prospects playing in the CHL, NCAA, and leagues around the world. Bookmark thn.com/Montreal to follow our comprehensive coverage of Canadiens prospects.
So each week we like to highlight a Montreal Canadiens prospect. This week we're going to shine the spotlight on Florian Xhekaj, 4th round pick from this past draft, picked at 101, currently playing with the Bulldogs of the OHL. Florian has 5 points in 6 games and 20 penalty minutes so far.
Fascinating. I remember he was called the unicorn by Nick Bobroff in the draft meetings. So yes, 5 points in 6 games. In his first 5 games this season, he had 3 game misconducts. 3 game misconducts, 1 for slew footing, 1 for leaving the bench, and 1 for instigating a fight. So points, 5 points in 6 games, as you said, and plenty of game misconducts. That definitely befits the description of a unicorn.
Yep, very much Xhekaj. I guess a Xhekaj younger brother is a good description of him. And with that note, we'll let our listeners decide if that's a good thing or not.
Yeah, that's right.
A few weeks ago, we put the spotlight on Bogdan Konushkov, and this week he was named as one of the KHL's All-Stars, so he'll be going to the KHL All-Star game. He continues to impress. It's a really good season so far for Bogdan.
Terrific season, and playing a lot of minutes, and quite worthy of. Yes, they're picking the representatives for the All-Star game already. Konushkov will be a representative as well. You might have heard the name Matvei Michkov before. Yes, he's he's going to the KHL All-Star game as well.
Last week, we reported that David Reinbacher sustained an injury. After assessment, no fractures. He'll be back between 1 and 3 weeks, so not as bad as we once were speculating, at least.
Yeah, he had an MRI, and as you said, it's great news. No fractures. Anthony Martineau from TVA Sport says that he is experiencing pain. He'll undergo physiotherapy, and it's unknown how he's going to respond to physiotherapy, but the expectation is 1 to 3 weeks.
And fresh off the press from last night, it appears that Lane Hutson sustained an injury. I don't think we have any updates as of yet. Yeah,
there was a bit in the third period. He suffered a big hit in the corner. The BU, Boston University head coach Jay Pandolfo, his quote on Lane Hutson was, "He's being evaluated. We'll know more Saturday, and we'll find out Saturday from the trainers and staff where he's at." That's a quote from his coach Jay Pandolfo.
And is it too early to revisit the 2022 NHL draft?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, The Athletic did it anyway. The infamous Juraj Slafkovsky draft here in Montreal. And kind of surprising to me, Juraj Slafkovsky remains number 1 on The Athletic's list, although they mentioned it's by a very slim margin. Rising all the way to number 2 is David Jiricek. Cooley stays at 3. A couple other Montreal draft picks moved around. Lane Hutson comes up to 25. Owen Beck at 29. Philippe Michard falls back to 63. Miguel Tourigny goes to 65. Adam Engstrom at 66. So a little bit all over the place so far. But like we kind of said, this seems pretty early, and a lot of these players haven't actually played any NHL games yet.
Well, it's interesting. As you said, Slafkovsky keeps that number 1 position, and the quote was by a razor-tight margin. And this is Corey Pronman from The Athletic, his rankings. We had talked about David Jiricek in the summer on the podcast because I kind of floated the idea, what if the Canadiens passed on Juraj Slafkovsky? You know, if you listen to our podcast that we both liked Logan Cooley, may have been our pick as the first overall. But this summer, I kind of floated the idea, what if the Canadiens took their mobile defenseman last draft, that being David Jiricek, and as the first overall pick, and then were able to take their gritty forward this draft and picked up Ryan Leonard at number 5. I know it's all speculation, but it's kind of fun to do. Interesting that Pronman also looks like he's a lot higher on David Jiricek than where he went in the draft.
Yeah, so like we said, probably a bit too early. I think in a few more seasons, it would be nice to look back at this draft just to see how it played out. But interesting to me that there was a lot of movement of Habs prospects outside of the first round, moving up quite a bit, especially with Lane Hutson and Owen Beck. Yeah,
for sure. And Lane Hutson, I think, absolutely consensus was that he would have gone much higher, but his size prevented that. The Canadiens took a chance on him, and I think their gamble is going to pay off.
Yeah. Taking a look at the Laval Rocket from this past week, they had a bit of a busy one, 3 games. If we want to go back to October the 14th, Abbotsford visits Laval, and they win 4-3. Laval Rocket go 2 for 9 on the power play. Elias Anderson scores twice, but Laval comes up short. a couple days in between, and Rochester comes to Laval, and it's an overtime win for Rochester, winning 5-4. The Rocket fight back with a couple of third period goals, but fall short in overtime.
You may have seen, just to interject there on that game, you may have seen a goalie goal being. It wasn't really. It was credited a goal credited to Strauss-Mann, and not really a goalie goal because he didn't touch the puck. It was a delayed penalty. Rochester tried to send it from behind the goal line back to the point, and it missed and kept going and went in. Strauss-Mann happened to be the closest player to the puck when it was shot, and so he is credited for the goal.
Yeah, highlight reel, of course.
Oh, for sure. That's how he'll tell it.
And the next game that happened was on the 20th of October. Laval gets their first win of the season, and kind of a wild one. 8-4 against Rochester. Jakub Dobes got the start in this one after backing up for 2. Joshua Waugh gets a hat trick. He kind of stole the show, and it's amazing what happens when the prospects are contributing.
It sure is. Joshua Waugh has become the top scorer in the AHL. 5 goals, 4 assists, 9 points in 4 games. And interesting thing, you might want to read Chris G's recap again, thn.com/Montreal. There's a tidbit in there that I found fascinating. Scott Pellerin, the hockey development coach for the Montreal Canadiens, happened to be in on practice and said, JF Houle, why don't you pair Joshua Waugh with Sean Farrell? I think they'd work really well together. Boy, did they ever work well together on Friday night, giving Laval their first win.
Absolutely. So Laval's record currently 1-2-1-0, 19th in the AHL. So off to a bit of a rocky start, but nice that they have that first win under the belts.
For sure. And checking the scoring, they have 3 players. This just doesn't happen. 3 players in the top 20 in scoring. We talked about Joshua Waugh. Yoel Armia, he won't be able to add to that total for a while. And Elias Anderson. So 3 Rocket in the top 20 in AHL scoring.
Lots of goals being scored, lots of goals being scored against too. Forward Emil Heineman has sustained an upper body injury. He was looking good to start the season, but kind of a shame that he's been injured pretty early on. Yeah,
maybe, who's to tell, but could he have been, if healthy, could he have been recalled instead of Yoel Armia? Possibly, but unfortunately has an injury and, according to Laval, is out indefinitely.
Another injury coming to a player that we thought had a great training camp, Jared Davidson. He's week to week with a lower body injury.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And he hasn't played all that much. Odd choice because he had such a good training camp, but maybe he was suffering with an injury. Apparently, that this injury was sustained during practice. So we'll hopefully the Laval Rocket will get him back soon. It leaves. Remember, we were talking about Laval Rocket having 17 forwards, 18 forwards at the start of the season. Now they're down to 12.
Philippe Michard has returned to the Kitchener Rangers. The organization is loaning him there, so kind of disappointing, but I'm hoping he gets a little bit more ice time.
Yeah, for sure. Again, a player that JF Houle just wasn't confident in playing. His first game this season, and he was benched for the third period. Houle said he needs to work on his defensive play. Well, that applies to a lot of players. Anyway, I think he'll be better served back in Kitchener. Just a note there that there's been a coaching change in Kitchener, and for my money, it's a good thing. There was, coaching. The Kitchener Rangers fired Chris Dennis. That happened in February. He was just 7 months into a 3-year contract, and with a community-owned team like that, they had to pay out $200,000. That's a big deal. So there had to have been really serious problems for them to eat that cost and fire him so quickly. They brought in Jussi Ahokas, who's a tremendous coach from Finland, lots and lots of experience. I'm hoping that he's going to be able to work magic with Machar, and that Philippe Machar will enjoy playing for him in the OHL. One more thing about Machar before we go, and Yuri Slafkovsky was asked about his friend this morning, and Yuri said it's a little step back for him, but I'm sure it can help him because last season was pretty good for him, but if he has an even better season now, it will give him much more confidence for next year's camp, and he went on to say he just needs to play.
Yeah, and, well, that brings me to my question. Are the prospects getting ice time in Laval? It really seems like JF Wool still likes his AHL and ECHL fringe veterans. He seems to be giving those players the bulk of the ice time.
Yeah, it's really disappointing. I think it's clear. We've seen JF Wool play the veterans when the Laval Rocket have very few prospects on the team, and now we're seeing him defer to the veterans when they have lots of prospects on the team. Friday night's game, there were no prospects in the top six. Joshua Waugh, Lucas Condata, and Sean Farrell were on the third line. Machar and Mishak were on the fourth line. No prospects in the top six, and there's lots of prospects in Laval. There's no excuse for that.
Yeah, and we'll hear from Jakub Dobes. Dobes started in the first game of the season. It was a bit of a rough one. He got pulled early on, and then, he had to sit on the bench for the previous two games before finally getting back into the net and getting the first win of the season.
No, I definitely wanted the next one. It was definitely a hard week of just, swallowing a tough pill, Definitely, I'm kind of excited to, show what I can do. It was a long time because usually in the past, if I have a bad game, I was in the net the next day. So I could prove myself right away and kind of, just turn the point around. So it was definitely, it was a great week of practice, but I still have it on my mind that I want to prove myself and just have a better game and just get a win. So, we can all be more happier and just have a kind of a better feeling in the locker room.
That's a really telling quote. Jakub Dobes played Friday night, second start, got his first pro win, his first win in the AHL. But he talked about how hard it was. And again, I don't understand the logic here. He was pulled in that game where he had given up 5 goals. Not his fault. Laval was playing awful against Abbotsford. And at the time, I thought it was a bit of a mercy pull and agreed with it completely. Throw in Strauss-Mann. He's not, he has no future with the organization. Whatever happens. And then get him back in the net to start the next game. That didn't happen. In fact, Strauss-Mann went on to start the next 2. And you can hear him, Jakub Dobes, say, when I was, he played for Ohio in the NCAA. If I had a bad game, I was in the net the next game, and I could rebuild my confidence, and I could prove that I was a solid goaltender. And having him sit and having all of that on his mind, even though it wasn't his fault, was just really poor goaltending, really poor player management by Laval. And I really felt for him and was really happy that he was able to get in the net and get his first win on Friday night.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a tough situation when you're a prospect. Maybe you don't have the greatest of luck in a certain game, and then to just get benched for a long period of time after that. What's the message, Is he going to have to go into every single game fearing that if things don't go his way, he's going to be on the bench for more games upcoming,
Yeah, and prior to Friday's game, and there's a lot of audio. Chris was at practice on Friday and collected a lot of audio from the coach, from the players, and he collected that audio from Jakub Dobes. But Jeff Wool talked about it being a must-win on Friday night, that he was really disappointed in the first few games. He thought they'd have more wins, and so that's why he was playing all of his veterans, because he thought the veterans could get him a win. A must-win, really? 4 games into the season? That's not the words of a coach who's really committed to development.
Yeah, so we'll keep an eye on the Laval Rocket. They have a couple of upcoming games between now and our next show. On the 21st of October, on Saturday, they're going to take a trip to Belleville, and then a few days off in between on the 27th of October. So I believe that's next Friday. Laval is going to go into Rochester. So watch out for those games, and we'll continue our coverage here. And by request, the Trois Rivières had their season opener on the 20th of October. They get a win. 4-2. Verbetic played very well in net. Goal and an assist by Jakub Novak, who was recently acquired by them during the offseason.
Yeah, so the Lions 4-2 win over Maine, the Maine Mariners. You mentioned Joe Verbetic, and the other news we had this week is that the Laval Rocket signed Joe Verbetic to a 1-year, 2-way AHL contract. Is it going to be a tandem? Are the Laval Rocket looking ahead to Strauss-Mann maybe, and it would be more appropriate if he was in the ECHL and bringing up Joe Verbetic, or is this just insurance? It's seeming more and more and more that Caden Primo isn't being factored into the equation for Laval.
So keep an eye on the prospects. Just head over to thn.com/Montreal. And on top of that, we did launch our new prospects website on the Hockey News. Rick, I know you're very excited to make this announcement.
Really excited. We've been previewing it the last few weeks. We've been trusted by the Hockey News to report on hockey at all levels throughout Quebec and the Maritimes. So we report on the Montreal Canadiens, the Laval Rocket, the Trois Rivières Lions, but also now we're going to be reporting on the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, and you can find that coverage at thn.com/QMJHL. There's also a Twitter account at Hockey News QMJHL. Please go and follow that. We have articles on the website right now, thn.com/QMJHL, from Jeremy Boucher, from myself, from Amy, from Mike Raschel, and you're going to want to read all the coverage about Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, the new site that was launched this past Wednesday.
So just to reiterate, you can find all our content about Canadiens prospects at thn.com/Montreal, and you can find the best English language coverage of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League at thn.com/QMJHL. And now it's a good time to get to our quotes of the week, and it's going to be a very Kirby Dach central quotes of the week. We have a very special quote coming from Rick Stevens himself from Canadiens Connection podcast, episode 265.
Let me just talk about Kirby Dach, because he's the key this season. He is Cole Caulfield may soak up all the headlines with his goal scoring, but the key player on this team this season is Kirby Dach. Away from that top line, he is his own person. He's able to exert his presence on the ice. He's able to, as you said, drive the play. He makes everybody he plays with better. He'll make Alex Newhook better. He'll make Juraj Slafkovský better if that line stays together. Kirby Dach is absolutely the key to that line. And if they can just jump on, go for a ride with Kirby Dach, he's going to take them places, and he's also going to take the team places. So buckle up and watch Kirby Dach. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. That was last week. How things can change in a week. And last week I was telling you to watch Kirby Dach, that he was the key to the line, the second line that he was centering with Slafkovský and with Alex Newhook, that he was even went a further step to say he was the key to the Canadiens season. and I kind of couched saying if that line stays together. Well, that line didn't stay together, it's difficult. Not only the injury, and as we said, we're going to talk about that later. The lost year of development for Kirby Dach, but also his impact, as I mentioned earlier, on the ripple effect that I called it. I was expecting a lot from Kirby Dach this season, and the Canadiens are going to have to do it without him.
Yeah, and another quote about Kirby Dach and his absence coming from Marty St. Louis.
He does a lot. Like he competes, his compete level. He brings a physical aspect to the game, not into like running around and hitting guys, but into winning a lot of pucks back. He's a guy that wins a lot of pucks, like in battles and steals pucks, and obviously, great in transition. He possesses. He's got a very elite brain. He can make plays, and he's shown that he can do a lot on the ice. And obviously his size. And listen, he's a big time player for us, and he's going to be missed. But the league doesn't care. There's one team that really cares. That Kirby's hurt. The rest of the league doesn't care, and the league keeps going. So for us, we got to keep going.
Just going to ignore that end part and focus in on what Marty said. And Kirby Dach wins puck battles. He that's why he was so good, kind of underused, but so good on the first line is because of his puck retrieval, and then his ability to cover in a defensive way and then transition to offense. There's few players, certainly on the Montreal Canadiens, that have that vision and being able to process the game, as Marty termed it, an elite brain. Probably Dach and Suzuki are the two smartest, in terms of hockey sense, the two smartest players who can process the game really quickly. That's really going to be missed, because Kirby Dach can do some of that thinking, do some of that processing, do some of the anticipating for his line mates, and they're going to miss that this season.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to leave a pretty big hole in the lineup, and we'll have to see if someone else can step up and maybe fill in that role. But Kirby Dach, he had the size. He could win those battles along the boards. Very smart. Like you said, drives the play quite a bit. So certainly a shame that his season was cut so short.
Absolutely.
Taking a look at news from around the league, in the early parts of the season, there's concern about low attendance levels. Some teams are selling no more than 80 to 83% of their arenas. Wonder if this is due to some ticket pricing.
Yeah, the Canadiens have continued to increase prices. We talked about that. Even though their bottom line, the salary, it makes up the vast majority of their expenses, and that salary cap, that cap being flat for the last few years, has not gone up. So there was criticism of that. Of course, it's a supply and demand thing, and it seems that the Canadiens can endlessly raise their prices with little effect. Unfortunately, that's not the case for, or maybe fortunately for other teams, and they're struggling when it comes to attendance levels. We have to accept the reality that on both sides of the border, that inflation is just skyrocketing. On the press zone, I talked about the pandemic having having lasting effects. That during the pandemic, families made new routines that didn't include hockey, and that's something that I warned about then. That a lot of the stay in, the entertainment at home routines would continue afterwards, and teams are going to have to do more, whether it is about ticket pricing, whether it's other ways to attract fans to the rink, to bring them back again.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with all of that. Another news coming out from the NHL is the NHL is asking teams for their opinions on staging a decentralized draft. So that means all the players would be showing up, but all of the teams themselves, the general managers and whatnot, would be staying at home and making the picks over a phone call. And to that, I say boo. Yeah, it's not official yet, but I think this would be a huge misstep, especially this season coming up with the draft being in Vegas. I think part of the intrigue for me wanting to attend these drafts is getting to see everyone in one place. Looking down and seeing all the general managers talking to each other. Maybe you hear them, maybe you don't, and you're wondering what's going on. In Montreal, you got to see Brian Burke walking down the street. That's an incredible thing in itself. So I think this would be a huge misstep. I know that I think the NBA and the NFL both do this, where it's the team staying at home and making the picks over phone call. I would caution against this.
Yeah, I hate this idea. Only the prospects being on site, which I guess has a certain appeal, but the reason you go to the draft, the reason that we bring and we have brought a group of our listeners and fans and folks that visit our website, we bring them and provide the tickets year after year after year, is that experience of seeing everybody in hockey in the same place. It's amazing, as you said, walking down the street or wandering the corridors and bumping into truly legends of the game. And also being able to see the interactions, the way negotiations play out. I've told these stories before, but Jarmo Kekalainen and Mark Bergevin in the 2016 draft in Buffalo, the negotiations over Pierre-Luc Dubois, the angst, the yelling, the physicality between the two of them was incredible. Sitting, and we were in the first row in Chicago, and I won't say which team, but there was a general manager and an agent behind, sitting in the row behind, negotiating a salary for a player behind us. And lots of times we were seated amongst families with parents and aunts and uncles who were in tears when their son his name is called. Yes, it's selfish. Yes, I want to provide that for other fans as well. Being together, being able to say hello to these people, being able to have that experience. NHL is unique, as you said. NFL, the NBA, they don't have this kind of face-to-face interaction, and I think it's what makes the draft unique in the NHL and really attractive destination for really passionate hardcore hockey fans.
So let's hope that teams say no to this. I certainly hope so, but we'll see how this develops, and we'll keep you up to date if there's any more reports about it. For now, we'll take our first break. You'll hear a message from our sponsors, DraftKings. And then during the Big Topic segment, we invite Dr. Stephen Morris to the show. So stay with us. This is the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio.
We are back with another week of football, and DraftKings Sportsbook is keeping us in on the NFL action with great offers every single game day. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 instantly in bonus bets. Throw $5 down on any of this week's epic matchups to walk away an instant winner. And DraftKings isn't stopping there. All customers can take advantage of 2 new offers every game day this September. Football's more fun when you're in on the action, so download the app now and sign up with code THPN. New customers can bet just $5 to get $200 instantly in bonus bets. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, with code THPN. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, KS. Licensee partner Golden Nugget Lake Charles, LA. 21 plus age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. See sportsbook.draftkings.com/football terms for eligibility, terms, and responsible gaming resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply.
Welcome back to the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio. My name is Michael Spinella. You can find me on Twitter at the Spinella. With me in the studio is the president and founder of Rocket Sports, Rick Stevens. You can give him a follow at Rocket Sports. You can also follow at Habs Connection on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and check out the website canadiensconnection.fm. Just a little reminder here to subscribe to the Canadiens Connection podcast in the player or on your favorite podcasting app. Now, this week, Canadiens center Kirby Dach was on a mission to carve his place in the lineup as a very powerful center in the National Hockey League. And the Montreal Canadiens made a firm commitment to reducing the man games lost to injury. They made many changes to their medical staff over this offseason, and that all came crashing down on Tuesday night against the Chicago Blackhawks. With under 7 minutes to go in the first period, something not so nice happened, didn't it, Rick?
It sure did, Michael. It's heartbreaking because we talked about Kirby Dach a lot last week, and he looked so good in the preseason. He looked great in game one. As we said last week, Kirby Dach makes everyone around him look better, play better. And unfortunately, the incident that happened in that second game against the Blackhawks. And so this segment 2, we're titling it "Ended Before It Began. Kirby Dach's season is over."
And we have a very special guest to bring into the studio today. It's Dr. Stephen Morris. He's going to be our medical consultant for Rocket Sports. He's joined the team. You'll see him on the podcast throughout the season periodically. And I'll welcome you to the show, Stephen Morris. How are you doing today?
Michael, thanks. Rick, thanks for having me. It's great to be here finally, especially as a listener. To hear you guys this time talking to me instead of talking at me is nice. And I'm just happy to be a part of Rocket Sports and offer you guys what I know about all these things relating to injuries and other things that are happening with the players throughout the year.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here, and we appreciate any time you can give us with your expertise. I'll just ask you before we get into this segment too much. You're a Canadiens fan, you're in Australia, and you're a doctor. So how did that all come about?
So I guess it starts with me. I grew up in Ontario. I started my medical sort of journey with work in human biomechanics, kinesiology, as well as doing research in muscle physiology. So I've always been fascinated in how the body works, and especially from an athletic point of view. When I was at Brock, I worked with the varsity lacrosse team and other sort of athletes there. And then I made the foray to medicine. And, while medicine is not always about athletes now for me, a lot of what I know in that field does still apply to what's going on with NHL players, whether it's injuries that we're going to talk about today or other aspects of their performance. You look at some of the things that have been going on in the offseason with Slavkovsky. I've talked about his training in the offseason and the specifics of it. I've talked about Lane Hudson and how well what we expect with his growth. So it's really interesting to be able to have these backgrounds and apply them to the team that we all love to watch and follow.
And we appreciate it. And sorry, I was just about to send it over to you, Rick, to get this segment started.
Sure. I was pretty excited to ask my first question, and I guess it's because the Canadiens, as you know, there's so many man games lost the last 2 seasons. There's as Michael said in the opening, a commitment to change that this season. But for us, it's about understanding not only injuries but training regimes, about nutrition, about rehab techniques, about return to play. And I think with your knowledge and your background and then your passion to the Montreal Canadiens, you can bring that together for us. And I think it's important from the outset. And Stephen, you and I have talked. You're a medical doctor, but you're not any of the Montreal Canadiens medical doctor. You've not examined the players. You've not seen their files. We're relying on publicly available information and then applying your medical knowledge and your experience to that so that we can give our listeners information that they can trust. And there was a terrible situation this past week with all kinds of rumors about Caden Gooley and how many weeks he was going to miss, and it, when the Canadiens finally came out, it's a day-to-day injury, not a long-term injury. So we want to stay away from all of those rumors, provide information that our listeners can feel confident about, and maybe explain how you can do that, given your position and where you are, and your remote position from the players.
Yeah, look, I mean, absolutely nailed it there, Rick. I have no inside information personally. I have nothing to do with the care of these guys. But I think in talking with you, and again, being a consumer of these kinds of podcasts and listening to lots of sports talk, I just have a different eye, I think, for what you're seeing, and can appreciate things that may be happening that maybe, the average Joe might not see. One example is I have no idea what Kirby's MRIs were like or anything like that, but the other day I had a look at the footage, and you can see on my Twitter account I've broken down a couple of instances, and we'll talk about it, of where I felt he could have had an injury that and what it may have been. Certainly didn't try to guess, how long he'd be out and that sort of thing. And it ended up being, the truth. And I guess it's when you understand a bit about the mechanisms of these injuries that we'll talk about, and the structures involved and that sort of thing, you get a better idea of what you could be dealing with. But yeah, I'm certainly not here to speculate on if someone's broken a bone or torn a ligament before we have any more information to actually confirm those things.
Yeah, and we appreciate all those expertise. And like we said, we're just going to go with public-ready information. So the official announcement for Kirby Dach's injury coming from the Montreal Canadiens is they said forward Kirby Dach will miss the remainder of the season after sustaining tears in his ACL and MCL in his right knee. He will undergo surgery.
So maybe let's take a minute just to describe what is an ACL, what is an MCL, what do they do, what function do they provide, and then when someone tears those two areas, what happens, and how does that affect their movement?
Yeah, sure. So the knee really is an area where two primary bones come together, right? You've got your thigh bone, which is the femur, and you've got the one of the primary bones of the lower limb, which is the tibia, and they sort of meet. But the thing is, bones don't just connect to each other; they need things to hold them together, and the ligaments are what connect bone to bone. You have four primary ligaments of the knee: the ACL, the PCL, the MCL, and the LCL. And it's a lot of terminology, but really the ones we're talking about are ACL, which is a reference to the anterior cruciate ligament, and the MCL, which is the medial cruciate ligament. The ligaments function to actually just stabilize the knee in different directions. So as you can imagine, when we walk forward, turn, twist, plant, our knee gets forces pushed on it in all directions, and it has to be able to stabilize. Otherwise, it would just open up or bend in the wrong way. So that's what the function of these ligaments is to each provide their own little piece of the puzzle in stabilizing the knee. You talked a bit at the start about, or you may have mentioned earlier before the show, about football versus hockey. You can imagine with the way that people move in hockey versus something like football, there's a lot less of that immediate stop, plant, twist stuff. And so ACL injuries on the whole and tears to the ligaments are not seen as much in hockey. MCL maybe a bit, but it's certainly not as prevalent. And the thing is, when you tear one of these ligaments, and just to go to the official statement by the Canadiens, I mean, saying you have a torn ligament, they don't say if it's complete or partial, and that's something to consider. But usually when you see a surgery, you're talking about something complete. When you have tears, it's really taking away the ability to stabilize in that direction. So with curve, like when you think about ACL and an MCL, you're talking about, imagine you're sort of trying to walk downstairs, and when you step down on the stair, your leg sort of bends backwards, and that would be the ACL missing, because normally it would support that movement. If you're trying to twist or plant, you may feel like your leg's giving out on you. You can't really pivot. You have these slipping sensations. So that's what you would feel if you had an ACL or an MCL injury pretty much. I mean, and there's certainly no way you'd be playing hockey or football or anything on that.
So our next question is, well, how does something like this happen? Looking at your Twitter account and the video you posted, I see a hit by Jared Tenorti. Is Jared Tenorti really the one to blame here? Or is there something else that could have happened? Is this something that maybe relates to his training and conditioning, or simply just bad luck?
Yeah, I think, we can all probably agree that there's always going to be, in a game like hockey, there's always going to be a component of bad luck. And I certainly wouldn't look at that injury and say Jared Tenorti's to blame, although, of course, he was part of the injury happening. Really, the way that, in my view, from looking at that, the way Kirby's injuries happened to both his ACL and his MCL is as he's skating along the boards, you can see his right foot is planted and it's going linearly sort of up and down the ice. But when Jared pushes him from the side, Kirby bends his body and twists it. And so he has a planted foot that he's twisting on now and getting pushed against. So because actually Kirby's leg is, I imagine, quite strong and able to hold that position and not fall off his skate, that actually contributes to him getting that injury because the bottom half of his leg stays in one way, but the top half spins. So it was at that moment that I imagine is when he actually had his injury, and then he gets pushed into the boards and, skates off and doesn't come back for another shift.
So now the injury's been diagnosed. The next step is treatment, and the Canadiens have already announced that Kirby Dach will need surgery. So what's the surgical process to repair a ligament? How long does that surgery take? What happens when Kirby Dach has surgery?
So when you talk about complete tears of the ACL, really the most common and the most time-tested way to fix that is called a graft reconstruction. It's done through cameras into the knee, so it's called arthroscopic. And there's two options really. When you tear a ligament, it's not going to repair itself as a nature of the lack of blood supply to the ligaments. We have to put something else there in its place. The two options that you have that are primarily used, number one is what's called an autograft. So it's a graft from the own person. So let's say, Rick, if you were to tear your ACL, they would offer you to take either a piece of your patella tendon, which is the front bit of your knee, or a piece of one of the tendons in your hamstring to replace what you've lost inside the knee. So they actually take a snippet and put it inside of your knee. The other options for people, probably not so much in Kirby's position, would be what's called an allograft or a cadaver graft. And that's using the ligament from someone else and putting it in. And those are usually cadavers. In terms of, when this surgery should take place after an injury, it's not really clear, but generally they tend to wait until someone's knee is less inflamed and acutely swollen, and that's because they find that the surgical outcomes and complication rates in the short term are better in that way. The complicating factor of this, though, is it's not just an ACL injury. He's also got MCL, and to be honest, he probably has, this is a guess, but I imagine he has meniscus involved as well, and that's what we call the terrible triad, an injury to the ACL, MCL, and medial meniscus. So he may require some work on those two as well. You can autograft an MCL as well. One of the things is when you have so much force pulling on these ligaments is that they can actually tear bone away as well. So you may need to suture that bone back together. So there's a lot of intricacies to it, but sort of for the most part, you're basically just taking tendons from one area of your own body and putting it where the ligaments should be, and allowing those to set, allowing the bones to fuse, and then rehabilitating the leg around it, really.
So it's good to know that I have 1/3 of the terrible triad. I have a medial meniscus tear in my right knee. So
there you go.
Speaking of recovery process here, just wondering if you could speak to what that process is, and with rehab, how long do you think that would take? And even when he does come back and he's starting to skate and starting to walk, how long would you expect it to be before he's back to 100%?
Yeah, look, I think that we're talking about a different group of people, right? Like an elite athlete, an NHL athlete is such a small percentage of the population, and they're pre-injury state is so high in terms of their level of fitness and their level of strength that their expected returns to sport are definitely different from what the average population is. Typically, we see something like 8 to 12 months, and that's primarily because of one statistic, which I'll give you, and that is that the number one or the biggest factor relating to re-injury or a complication following this is time to return. So people that return earlier have been found to be the leading cause of re-injury. So you always want to be cautious with these, and I think like looking at the way that things have changed with the Habs in terms of their medical management in the last season is they're going to be cautious as heck with this because they don't want to end up with any storylines that are coming from last year, which is another season gone or another long-term injury that they've sort of mismanaged, let's say. So in professional athletes, so you see different timelines. Like, I can go into a couple of examples, but you may see something like even 6 months, 7 months, because they have lots of resources, they train very hard, and it's really their full-time job to get their knee back to strength. The minimum requirements for returning to sport are to demonstrate that your knee has the adequate strength, proprioception, and function as the non-injured knee. And if you can do that, and you can do that with confidence, then we're talking about getting back to things.
Just to follow up before we move along here, once he does get back on the ice and start skating, do you think he will have some trouble with how it feels? Is this going to feel very different than it was before? Maybe he'll have to kind of relearn some things?
I don't imagine so, honestly. Like, I think that when you start out, there's a couple of things, and part of it is physical, but the other is mental. When you have these kinds of injuries, and you'll hear people talk about this, it's not about whether your knee works or not, but it's just about being comfortable, number one, on using something that has just been repaired, but also being in certain positions on the ice. So Kirby's going to have to, go up and down the boards, get some brushes, and realize that, his knee is not going to fail him, and gain the confidence to a degree of being in more vulnerable positions with his new knee. We're talking about 6 to 7 months from now. I think that is going to be almost a bigger part of it than how he actually skates or how his biomechanics are as such.
And I think related to that, and it's probably the most important question for Habs fans is the outcome of this surgery and recovery and his return to the ice. Can you talk about a history of athletes who have had this surgery, some successes, some failures? I can personally think of Tom Brady, who had that surgery and obviously had a very long career after that. As a Vikings fan, I think of Adrian Peterson, who after the surgery had one of the best seasons of his career. In hockey, there's Joe Thornton, and maybe Andrei Markov, who didn't look the same afterwards, after his injury and his surgery. So, what's likely for Kirby? He plays the game on the edge. He uses his speed. He's a physical player. Is he going to be able to reach his potential, or at least what we all expect of a third overall pick?
So Kirby has one thing going for him that someone like Andrei Markov does not, and I'll give you one guess as to what that is.
It'd be age, yeah.
Age, yeah. Absolutely, his age, yeah. So there's a research study on ACL injuries in NHL hockey players by Xhekaj et al. In 2015 through the Minnesota Orthopedic Center. And they examined 47 players over a span of 4 years from 2006 to 2010, 36 of which being forwards. They looked at how they were performing before and after their ACL surgeries, and they found that on the whole and on average, forwards that had ACL repairs in the next 2 seasons were dropping their games played by about 20%. They were scoring less points, and only just under a quarter of them were actually able to maintain their production from pre-injury to post-injury. In addition to that, they found that, they were only playing about 2.8 years on average after their injuries, and the presence of things like meniscal injuries we talked about earlier actually independently related to reductions in career length. So that sounds pretty bleak, but they said that the major risk factor for poor outcomes was age, and actually age over 30 particularly, which makes sense. Mm-hmm. As an over 30, I can imagine that. I can barely go for a run without, having aches and pains. So imagine getting an ACL repair. But let me ask you guys this question. What do you think of Anders Lee as a player?
I think he's good.
Yeah, he was a very solid player for sure.
Yeah, so Anders Lee, I didn't know this until now because I watch him play and I think he's great. He does exactly, honestly, when I think about Kirby Dach, he's a big body. He's a guy that can go to the front of the net, and he plays certainly a bit of a grittier game. He had a ACL repair in the season of 2020, or 2021, sorry, and he was back on the ice in 6 months, so he missed sort of the back half in return for training camp the next year. His injury season, he only played 27 games, but he was on a 0.44 points per game. When he came back, season 1, post-surgery, 0.6 points per game, played 76 games. Season 2, post-surgery, 0.6 points per game, 82 games played. So you look at the research on this, and then you look at someone who's probably a closer comp to what's actually going on, and you can see that it's not all doom and gloom for someone like Kirby, and his young age and the plethora of time he has to actually get back on ice, I think are going to serve him well. And I would be happy to say that I don't think he's going to suddenly drop off a cliff.
Well, you talked about his mental approach and important that how he reacts to this injury. Unfortunately, he has plenty of experience, and we look at his injury history, and he, concussion and then a wrist in 2020 and 21, missed 64 games, upper and lower body injury last year, missed 24 games, and now he'll miss about 80 games this season. What do you have to say about the label being injury prone? Is that fair? Is that real? Is it just luck as was mentioned earlier?
I think that in some cases it is real, but that would be regarding sort of re-injuring stuff. So we know that people with injury to one area, as I talked to you about the ACL stats, their chance of re-injury is certainly there and higher than anyone to receive a new ACL injury. But I think when we talk about this sport, I mean, you watch the game, and especially if you ever watch game live or you're sort of rinkside, you can really appreciate the speed and the force at which this happens. And at the end of the day, you can train as much as you want, but if someone slashes your wrist, they slash your wrist. And you can train as much as you want, but if you have a freak sort of incident where you're pushed into the boards the wrong way, that just is what it is. I think what players do and what teams are after is for them to prevent the preventable. So, we talk about, and I'll have some work coming up probably over the course of this year regarding load management. This is something that we can actually do for players to help prevent injuries throughout a season that we know is quite long and arduous. And so to that point, there are preventable injuries, but I think at the end of the day, there's just trauma, and that's what happens. It's what they know they're getting into, and all they can do is prep their bodies as best as possible to hopefully prevent being in those vulnerable situations. Another aspect of that, of course, is just how you play the game. Some people play a much more physical style or physical brand, and they may be more sort of prone to these injuries than someone who plays around the periphery, takes shots from the half floors, and sort of skates around a little bit, goes for change, and then doesn't get too dirty on the walls. So
a Brendan Gallagher versus Jonathan Drouin, yeah.
Well, yeah, look at Brendan Gallagher, right? I mean, geez, how many times? I don't think any amount of push-ups would stop Brendan Gallagher's hand from breaking when Shea Weber took a shot at it. So
exactly.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen, for joining us today. We appreciate the expertise. Looking forward to chatting with you more throughout the season as our medical consultant. But of course, I think the less we talk to you, that's probably what's better for the team. That means fewer injuries, of course. But where can all the good people find you on social media?
No worries. That's what my patients say to me as well, Michael. So that's fine. I don't take offense to it anymore. So they can find me on Twitter at Doc Morris MD. That's where I post my thoughts about what's going on with the Habs and their training, injuries, that sort of thing. And yeah, I look forward to being a part of it and giving you guys my insight on anything else that happens in the rest of the year.
Awesome. Oh, sorry, you had something
I just
else, Rick?
it was a terrific segment. We really appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah.
No worries. Thank you.
So with that, we're going to have our Canadiens Connection question of the week coming up in segment 3. So we'll take our final break here, and we'll get to that momentarily. Stay with us. Thank you for listening to the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio.
Connection is proud to be a partner of Rocket Sports Media, digital media publishers of sports and entertainment websites. Their mission is to build a worldwide network of sports fans who are informed, engaged, entertained, and connected. Learn more about RSM, its team, and its portfolio of brands at rocketsportsmedia.com. I bet you enjoy sporting your best Habs jerseys, dressing up your kids and pets in the cutest Habs gear, and showing off your decked-out hockey cave or fanning. Well, don't just show your friends, show your Habs. The Rocket Sports Media team wants you to boast your finest pictures for our global network of Montreal Canadiens fans. Include the hashtag #ShowYourHabs when posting your fan photos on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Then log on to showyourhabs.com to see your entries, along with photos and posts from Habs fans all over the world. A proud member of the Rocket Sports Media Network. If you're a business owner looking for the perfect platform to reach a targeted audience of customers, Rocket Sports Media is the solution. Our global hockey community provides unmatched social media reach to an attentive demographic of sports and entertainment fans. We can provide visibility to your company, helping you to engage and leverage this prime group of potential clientele. In addition, we also offer sponsorship opportunities for fan events and featured areas of website content, giving you name and logo recognition. Visit rocketsportsmedia.com to contact us regarding this unique marketing opportunity. For the most trusted source of news, analysis, and features about the Montreal Canadiens, log in to thn.com/Montreal, your year-round source for anything Habs related. That's thn.com/Montreal.
Welcome back to episode 266 of the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio. You can follow at Habs Connection on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Plus, check out our website, canadiensconnection.fm. And feel free to text us anytime via the Rocket Sports text line. It's 5853-ROCKET. That's 5853-ROCKET. And here's what you need to know. We have all of our Rocket Sports Media coverage of the Montreal Canadiens in one place. Just head over to thn.com/Montreal. On there, you'll find all our game day previews, post-game reports, feature articles, notepads, anything and everything you need to stay up to date on the Montreal Canadiens. We also have a YouTube channel, and we've been using it quite a bit lately. So head over to YouTube, just search @AllHabs, and subscribe to our channel. On there, you will find the Habs Hockey Report Show. Amy Johnson hosts that once per week, and the latest episode is entitled, "Okay, Habs Hockey Gods, Enough Already." So she gets into it on that one. You'll want to tune in, leave a like, leave a comment, hit subscribe. And brand new to our channel on YouTube is the Rocket Hockey Report. This is the best way to stay up to date with Habs prospects in Laval, and you'll want to tune into that as well. If you have any interest in keeping up to date with Habs prospects and the Laval Rocket, that's going to be your inside source, as the premiere show was just posted this past week. So tune into that. Also, we put this podcast on YouTube now, the Canadiens Connection. Last week's episode, Habs Hidden Gems, fans must-have guide to enjoy the season. So make sure you tune into that. Maybe you're already listening to YouTube. If you are, hit subscribe. If you're not, head over to our channel, hit subscribe as well. Leave a like, leave a comment, and we would love to hear from you. Also, make sure you subscribe to this podcast. This is a premier Rocket Sports Radio podcast, and we're on all of your favorite podcasting apps. It's the Canadiens Connection. You can also find all of our episodes at canadiensconnection.fm. We are your inside link to the Montreal Canadiens.
We're committed to be that inside link, and one of the changes that we've done this year, you heard him in the second segment, Doc Morris, he's going to be back throughout the season, and he can speak with some authority intelligently about injuries, about the way back for Kirby Dach and others, and we're really pleased to have him, and as well as the other changes that have been made. Those are the video shows on YouTube are terrific, both the Habs Hockey Report and the Rocket Hockey Report.
Yeah, and a big congratulations to Amy Johnson for hosting the premiere episode of the Rocket Hockey Report this past week. I tuned in. I enjoyed it quite a bit, so just a little extra encouragement for everyone to go on and check that out. And you mentioned some changes. Well, there's one more thing. We are covering the QMJHL at the Hockey News. Just head over to thn.com/QMJHL. And Rick, I believe we're going to be recruiting a little bit for this.
I think so. We have a new site. We'd like some extra writers. So if you want experience, if you'd love to see your name on a publication that's posted to the venerable The Hockey News, and you're passionate about hockey in Quebec, you're passionate about junior hockey, you're passionate about the QMJHL, we really want to hear from you, so reach out to us on social media. Send us a text at 5853-ROCKET or an email, hello@rocketsportsmedia.com.
And now we turn it over to our listeners. Our Canadiens Connection question of the week is, in the absence of Kirby Dach, who do you think will step up to the plate and fill his role? We want to make sure that we hear from you. You can text us via the Rocket Sports text line, 5853-ROCKET. You could reach out to us on social media. And Rick, I believe if people have something a little bit more to say, they can email us as well.
Sure can. hello@rocketsportsmedia.com.
So we get tons of tweets, emails, comments, everything. Lots of people reach out to us, and we get plenty of messages throughout the week. The latest episode of the Canadiens Connection was your must-have guide to enjoying Habs hockey. It's episode 265, and we got quite a bit of reaction to that. Our first reaction comes from Bill McLean, and Rick, I'll let you get this one started.
Bill's in Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. As we've said, our Habs fan community is everywhere, and he reached out to us on Facebook, and look for our Habs Connection Facebook page, and he said there's some undisciplined penalties, and they'll usually hurt on the scoreboard. It's never easy to play shorthanded. The team is very fast and has shown some amazing plays, so he likes the speed that he sees. He doesn't like the indiscipline.
We have a Facebook reply coming from Phil in Irwin, Tennessee. What Phil had to say is, I like the 75 team points, possibly higher, but still out of the playoffs. Division is tough. Caulfield around goals in a full season. Doc already injured. Oh no. Newhook, 40 points plus for sure. Like to see Slavkovsky get 30 plus points. So big thank you to Phil for that one.
Alan Hunter via Facebook says, I'm a bit disappointed with Laval's start. There's lots of young prospects. Indeed, there are, Alan. And fortunately, Laval got their very first win of the season on Friday night.
Bruce from Gander, Newfoundland reached out to us on Facebook as well. Bruce says, Habs versus Wild was a bit of a train wreck to watch. I agree, Bruce, very much so.
Yeah, indeed it was. Art on Facebook says, and I should preface this that the most comments, if there was one topic that people wanted to talk about this past week, it was about the Canadiens opening home opener ceremony. There were so many comments, and I picked one of them, and that comes from Art. He says, I'm a lifelong Habs fan, born and raised in Montreal. I was thoroughly disappointed in the fans at the Bell Center for booing the kid, talking about Connor Bedard. No class at all. And then some others went on and referenced hockey gods about the bad ceremony and the connection to Kirby Dach. They talked about the ghost of the Forum and so on. People were very upset about the lack of history in the opening ceremony.
And we were reached out to by Leo via email, and you heard me say that our ECHL coverage might have been coming from request. Well, this is part of the reason why Leo reached out to us and said, hello, thank you very much for highlighting Rocket and AHL in general in the podcast. Is it possible to spend some time on the Lions and talk more about how things are going in the ECHL in the podcast form? Well, the Lions season just started, and we did give you a little bit of info on that. So that comes from our very devoted listener, Leo. Yeah,
and you can I can confirm that Chris G is very interested in covering the Trois-Rivières Lions. If you go to our site, at thn.com/Montreal, you'll see a number of articles on the Trois-Rivières Lions, including talking a preview of the season. Their opening night was just on Friday, so we weren't ignoring them. We were just waiting for their season to start.
And Montreal's season gets a little bit busier this week. We have 4 games between now and our next podcast. The first one comes tonight, Saturday, October the 21st. Washington visits Montreal. Day of break in between before Montreal heads over to Buffalo on the 23rd. It's going to be a back-to-back as New Jersey comes to visit Montreal the day after. Day off, and then on the 26th of October, the Columbus Blue Jackets come to Montreal. So a bit of a mix in competition, but plenty of fun games that we're looking forward to watching.
And that'll be Jake Allen in goal for the Canadiens at the Bell Center tonight against the Capitals.
So that's going to be a wrap for us today. Thank you all for tuning in and listening. Make sure you subscribe to the Canadiens Connection podcast in the player or on any of your favorite podcasting apps. Share it on social media too if you like what you heard. Enjoy the week. We'll be back here next Saturday, October the 28th for another great episode. Thank you all for listening to the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio.
Click subscribe so you never miss an episode of Canadiens Connection. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Rocket Sports.